Okay, Bob King, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success Podcast. Great to have you on. Bob, you're a seasoned sales expert, author of The Joy of Closing, the definitive guide to building trust, getting the deal, and creating happy customers.
Yes, sir.
Very
That is my book.
interesting words in there, joy and trust, which I'd love to expand on. I'm curious, most people would agree that we need to go towards a trust-based approach. 84% of B2B decision makers start the buying process with a referral. It certainly makes sense. Yet, going from, say, a product-centric approach to trust-based closing is not just a mind shift, there's perhaps also a bit of a heart shift involved. And there's a few, I'd say, challenges. 77% of B2B buyers feel that making a purchase is time consuming and complex. Only 27% of B2B buyers say vendors are very effective at demonstrating a clear understanding of their business needs. 68% of B2B customers are lost due to the indifference or perceived apathy, not because of mistakes. And 95% of B2B buyers choose vendors who provide relevant content at every stage of the buying process. But just to provide a bit of a snippet of the challenges we face, but given your experiences, what would you say are the biggest issues that B2B brands face as they move towards a trust-based approach?
All of that is so fascinating. I'm like making my way through those statistics to see how it relates to my. So I don't have a ton of B2B clients. Most of them are with one of my consulting companies and one of the companies I consult with. And it's been completely fascinating. I think, though, I do have some insights as to where there's such obvious room for improvement in B2B sales. And it's funny when you say 68%
Mhm.
perceive indifference as to the cardinal sin of a sales call is making it about you. And that customer doesn't perceive it as that. What they perceive that as oftentimes is indifference. And so I think it's like, if I had to guess, if I were like, I mean, you're talking about across many industries and many different types of products and services, right? But the biggest difference between B2B and B2C is B2C, you're almost always going for a one call close. There's no question a one call close is the gold standard. And so a lot of things in my book are focused on that. But what I've come to understand is you only have the element of surprise one time with a customer. And so having the maximum impact at that moment is so key to your future success, because you may not be sitting in front of the person who can say yes, but you're holding back a compelling pitch that takes that customer on an emotional journey from the pain of their current situation to the pleasure of your solution. You're really not giving them the best opportunity to do business with you. And so I think the process in my book really applies to far more industries and services and goods than not. And that there's really no situation where the principles that are always present when you're looking for a one call close, I don't think that they are absent from the B2B process or a longer sales process for a bigger price. I think they're actually just as relevant. And I've seen that in practice.
And you mentioned the one call clause, which I'd love to explore as well. You have also been involved in the film industry. In fact, you directed a movie that premiered at the
Yes, I
Sundance
was.
Film Festival. You
Absolutely. Psycho Beach Party coming up on its
Oh,
23rd year
wow.
anniversary or something
Okay.
like that.
Uh,
Yeah.
and you've done everything from retail through to in-home sales and certainly business to business
Correct.
pitches as well.
And getting into venture capital, which is
Oh,
really
wow.
fast, which if you're raising money, let
Mhm,
me just flip over the cards. If the desired outcome of you
mhm.
meeting with a prospect is them writing a check, guess what? Your job is closing. It's not selling. It's not presenting. It's not having the best idea. If you live in this wonderful world where the best idea always wins, great. Let me know where that is and I'll book a ticket. But really, where we live is in this world where the person who's able to communicate that the skill of getting someone else to take on your agenda and think it was their idea is still
Mm,
incredibly valuable. And really, that's what my book's about. It's how to create that in your customers, in your family members, in the book club that you want them to read a specific book for. You really, closing is a skill that we
mm,
can't live without, but that has been completely undervalued as a way to be of service, especially in the world of sales. And in my opinion, completely cheapened by this sort of stare at the Ferrari you want to buy and then use that to motivate your self will to impose your agenda on the customer.
mm.
That does not work. 10% of people are going to buy from you anyway. Like they just made the appointment so they could get your product and service, and you almost can't screw it up. But if you want to get above that 10% into where you're actually a value to your company and making money, that's where I might be able to help.
It's interesting you say that closing has been cheapened or undervalued
Yes.
from your perspective.
Why? I guess because it's so easy and attractive to say that you're doing
Mhm.
things for money. We just live in a culture where there's this perceived culture of lack, I would call it. And then the internet comes along where everything is supposed to be an analytical decision based on price. And that's really what the internet does for you. And you might read a few recommendations, but at the end of the day, when you're looking for something on Amazon, you're basically trying to find the cheapest version of the
Mhm.
best, thing. So you figure out what's the best and then you get it cheaper. And there's no expertise being offered to you. There's no really understanding of what your needs are, right? And when you're talking about a sales process where people are spending great sums of money, I think if you are able to establish your expertise by paying attention to the customer, making a human connection, understanding what their needs really are, and then showing how your knowledge can benefit them, that's a better
Mhm.
world for them to live in than how can I get it for
Certainly.
cheaper?
I'd love to explore some of these concepts in a bit, but I'm also curious,
Some
given
tea.
your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
As a salesperson,
As in, would you say is your own personal area of strength?
I think the thing I do better than most salespeople, the thing that makes me a closer is I pay attention to the customer and I have a sincere attempt
Mhm.
to understand their needs. And whether or not just how I can shoehorn what I have into their buying opportunity, but really to recommend something that's going to benefit them and accomplish their goal. I sold a lot of solar power. So was I there to make them feel good about their
Mhm.
energy use by not polluting the environment? Or was I there to save them a bunch of money on their electric bill? And for most people, it's both, or maybe even a third reason. But just spending time understanding that about the customer really pays huge benefits. And then I have to tell them things they don't know. I have to inform them, I have to empower them to make an informed decision. And then I have to ask for it. The other thing I don't do is disappear the minute they either tell me a lie or present an objection as a condition, which is what most salespeople do.
In that area of strength, this ability to understand your customers better, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
The power of a full and complete sales pitch is, I think, the biggest thing. When you have one chance to get a customer's business, I was trained by scoundrels how to
Mhm.
get that job the first time I met it. I literally knock on a door, tell someone about something they never heard of, and walk out with a check for $1,000 and a commitment to spend tens of thousands of dollars more. That has been my job for a really long time now. And I will tell you, when I first heard about it, I didn't think there was any way
Mhm.
that was even possible. But if I didn't sell the deal, especially for that first company, they had a manager that would call up the customer 3 days later and say, "Hey, we have this incredible deal for you." Undercut my own deal, and then I made nothing. I was out
Mm.
gas, money, and time. So that's a trial by fire, and so it makes you do two things. Number one, make a great presentation that makes them really
Mhm.
want what you have, that connects their pain of their current situation with the pleasure of your solution. The lots of
Mhm.
tribal appeals in terms of your company story, lots of personal appeals in terms of your why you work there. All these things that B2B businesses
Mm.
don't do very well. They're really good at talking about the product, but they do not talk about the why. They don't even talk about the why for the company, let alone the product that they're trying to pitch. And I will tell you, when they do, it's incredible the results they can have.
So for those listening, the second.
The second thing it made me do was learn how to close people, which means working with the customer's resistance in order to get them something they want. And that's a whole other skill, but you have to have both. Like, you have to be a killer presenter in order to have any chance of.
Could you expand on this idea of working with customers' resistance?
Sure. And I know it's different in B2B, because in B2B, a lot of times you cannot get the decision maker, especially to the first meeting. But the person that you are presenting to, you sometimes have to close them on advancing it to the next. There's still no moment. The longer I do this and the more different industries I see and products I see, and even in my own coaching, the more I do this, the more I see that people just always need to be closed. No matter how good your idea is, no matter how superior your product is, or how much better the process I'm advocating is than what they're doing now, if I don't make them feel the pain of their current situation, establish my expertise, advise us, give them a scope of work long before I give them a price, talk about my company, talk about the product that I'm advocating for them, present price, pay attention to what they say next, and use that as a way to create intimacy so that eventually 3 or 4 no's down the line, they'll tell me what's really holding them back. And I can speak to that and earn their trust and earn their business. Like, that process, it just isn't ever not present in one form or another for me to be successful.
Certainly. Would it be fair to say, at least in a B2B setting, you're not just trying to ensure that you're speaking to all the decision makers, because there could be multiple decision makers in a B2B scenario, but you're actually
You're usually B2B, you're meeting with only people who can say no until you get to the point where
right.
someone can say yes. And there's a lot of kind of drama that goes into that. But the problem is, they think they don't have, first of all, a lot of times they'll say, oh, I don't do a sales pitch. Like, they read some sales book that said, don't be salesy. And these are people selling multi-million-dollar products. It's insane that some schmo knocking on a door to sell $30,000 worth of solar is more prepared for that meeting than someone, walking into a Fortune 500 company with a multi-million-dollar product. That's insane. But I promise you, that guy selling the solar knows what he's going to say for the next 45 minutes. And I have seen company after company where they just don't know. They'll literally say, oh, I don't have a sales pitch, as if that's some badge of honor. And what that really means is they have a really bad sales pitch, because nobody doesn't have a sales pitch. I consult for another company where the guy who did the best, he's like just asked a lot of discovery questions, and then found their pain point, spoke to that, and closed based on that. And that, for that company, was a really effective sales, but it's not a sales pitch. And the moment he became aware that was his sales pitch, we were able to add a few little nuances to it, an effective company story that made the customer qualify and brought in some tribal appeals. And suddenly he was closing 30% more than he was before we did that process. So there's always room for improvement. But if you think you don't have a sales pitch, you have a terrible sales pitch.
In a B2B scenario, at times there are multiple decision makers. In some scenarios, they need to make a decision collectively as opposed to individually. Would you say that, or aim with your approach, is to not just get each of them to say yes, but to also perhaps get them into a room where you can make a kind of multi-pronged pitch that speaks to each of their interests and objectives or use cases as well?
I still find there's really 1 or 2 people that's really driving the decision. I think you're better off figuring out who those people are and really speaking to their concerns while not alienating the person that got you in the room. And mostly number one, they don't give a full pitch to the person who can't make a decision. That is crazy in a B2B situation. You should have First of all, when that person walks out of the meeting, you want them to say, hey, I met with all these companies, but that guy, Vinay, oh my God, he really seemed to have what we're looking for. But that's what you want that person to say. And that does not happen unless you give that person a complete and full presentation and everything else that goes along with that. For God's sakes, give them some motivation to say yes. Like it doesn't, it's not pressure. It's just my time costs my company money. If we can come to this decision sooner than later, I'm allowed to give you a X amount of discount. At least give them some excuse.
Certainly. It's interesting you said that there's usually one person who drives the decision making. And in a lot of conversations.
Oh, that's the other thing I was going to say. The other thing is, when you get to that decision maker, a lot of times there's this weird thing where salespeople don't want to seem salesy, and then they don't do a full pitch to the person who can actually make a decision because they think, oh, that other person who heard my full pitch is going to think like I'm a robot or something like that, which is crazy. If you don't know exactly what you're going to say about your company, exactly what you're going to say about your product that you say every day, you're just not a very good driver. Right?
Yeah.
That's all it is. You can't pay attention to traffic. If someone's going to jump in front of your car, you will not be able to stop in time. And you're going to take longer to get anywhere because you're too busy thinking about which pedal to push or where the turn signal is instead of what you could be focused on, which is the conditions and the road conditions, when they're nodding, when they're shaking their head. If you really know what you're going to say about those things, you can pay attention to a world of things that you will not be able to pay attention to if you're trying to figure out what to say. So what happens is you get to the big meeting and then they, for whatever reason, maybe they did do a full pitch and they think, oh, I don't want to be repetitious. And instead, all you do is embarrass the person who said how great you were by not giving the decision maker all the information that they had when they brought you in as a recommended solution. So you have to start from scratch every time if someone new is in the room. And it does not matter if people are there who heard it before. They will be much more grateful to you for not making them look like fools for recommending you than they ever would be bored by you repeating it.
I'm also curious, closing is half the problem at the very least. Perhaps a major initial issue or challenge that salespeople come across is getting access to a decision maker. Often they're busy, maybe the CEO who has gatekeepers, etc. How would you recommend getting their attention so that you can give them your best pitch for closing the deal?
Number one, prioritize that. Don't think, oh, I'll go through the normal rungs. Those rungs are designed to basically give companies a way to say no. So you got to just start with the intention that I have something valuable that this person's going to want if they know about it. And what would you do in that circumstance? Because that's going to be a lot different than just, oh, I'm going to respect their process. Of course, you have to respect their process, but you don't have to succumb to their bureaucracy.
Okay.
And just acting like you have something valuable and important will change everything about how you perceive.
So that would come through in your communication and perhaps meetings with others as well, which would then lead to a potential meeting with the decision maker.
Yeah, and just be creative. Like, pay attention to who you're talking to. The other thing that's really valuable is when I was making movies and I would submit them to these festivals, and film festivals are run by people who love movies, and then they get in this position and they like get inundated with 8,000 movies. They can't even watch them all. And even though they've collected an entry fee back then. And what I realized after 2 submissions, thinking like, oh, all I need to do is send it in because my movie's so great that why wouldn't anybody want to show it? That didn't work. That was not true at all. When I did follow up, it was pretty obvious no one had seen it. And certainly no one who could say yes had seen it. And so I immediately shifted my process to, before I would ever even submit to a festival, call up that festival. Usually back then, the person running the festival would answer, or someone at least who was going to be on the receiving end of your movie, right? And if you can pitch the movie at that point effectively, at least one person will watch it when it comes in. And that will put you in a far better position. Any filmmakers out there, please pay attention to this. If you think like your film is going to get into a festival based on the merits of your filmmaking, again, you're living in some world where the best idea wins and the meritocracy at the core of everything is expressing through your experience. That's not the world. The world does not work like that. And so you need to make friends. And so making a friend of the person that you're initially contacting, and that literally could be someone at the end of an email, or the person answering the phone, or the contact you meet in a social setting. But even though they can't say yes, you need to treat them as someone that you can close on the idea of getting to
Hmm.
the person who can say yes.
So is this what you would refer to as your one call magic?
One call magic is a
Mhm.
specific process. It's a distillation of classic one call closing techniques that I was trained in at a relatively late stage in life. And I recognized by then my film career had already been sabotaged by my inability to
Mhm.
close people, because I did the opposite of what I figured out makes people want to work with you. And so that's why it was such a powerful experience to me, which gets to your other question about why has closing been stigmatized. And what shocked me the most about learning how to close people is it really made the rest of my life a lot better once I connected to the true purpose of it, which is to be of service and get your customer something that they want. That is very powerful. Earning someone's trust is an incredibly rewarding experience that if you hook into
Mhm.
that as your motivation and not just getting something you want, as most of these sales books,
Mhm.
closing books advocate, you're gonna have a lot more
Uh,
success. Okay,
Yeah, I was
there we go.
wondering if you could
Sorry.
give us an example to help us wrap our minds around it, because most of us have been told that we need to understand our customers better. We certainly need to speak to their issues in order to make our pitch or offers relevant to them. What does that actually look like?
It
Mhm.
comes in different forms, but initially it's just paying attention to them as human beings. I think that's really a lost art. And if you look at people who close, I wrote my book so the 80% of salespeople who only make
Mhm.
20% of the sales would finally have access to the information that the 20% who make 80% of the sales already know and
Mhm.
will never tell them. So, number one, pay attention to who you're talking to as a human being and pay a sincere compliment to them. Try and find common ground and just have some interest in
Mhm.
them as a human being. That's a really important thing that gets completely lost. The buzzword going around sales literature and stuff is empathy, but I just think it's really giving a shit. It's just not being a robot and actually recognizing that you are in front of an actual human being and paying some attention to who that is. That'd be the first part. And then as pertains to sales training, I've gone to a lot of
Mhm.
sales trainings over the years, and there's always like a couple of things that I take away. The one, because I love a new toy. So if I go to a training and someone says something that resonates with me, I will take that into a bunch of sales situations and have success just because it's a fun new toy. And if I do
Mhm.
it a couple of times and it seems successful, eventually I'll think that I came up with it. But oh my God, where is my brain today, Vinay? I'm so sorry. But sales trainings. Oh, I can't get over these shards of light like blasting on my head right now. And I'm just trying to figure out a way to end that. Okay, maybe that's better. I don't know, man. I feel like I'm glowing like an alien spaceship.
Is there perhaps a framework or a set of principles that you use to ensure that you are on point with your one call magic?
Structure and repetition. Not like there's a warm up which is
Mhm.
different every time. There's your actual pitch, so it's making them feel the pain of their current situation and seeing the pleasure of your solution. It's what you're going to say about your company, what you're going to say about the product. It's presenting price. It's shutting up at that point so
Mhm.
they can talk, which is another huge mistake that salespeople do that closers don't. Is whenever you pass price or ask for the deal, you need to stop talking. And it could be very awkward, but it's really important because the customer then will oftentimes tell
Mhm.
you what's holding them back. Or sometimes they'll just say yes. Just remember, your customer can't say yes if you're
Mhm.
still talking. And then it's the art of really working with their resistance and figuring out a way to that they can say yes. And it's starting with a mindset of believing in
Mhm.
what you're doing, which is another thing that I think really gets lost. and colors everything about your interaction with that customer. Because if you believe that the very best thing for everybody is for them to say yes, get your product, and get started as soon as possible, and that's for the customer, for your company, and for you in that order, if you start your meeting with that mindset, everything about your pitch will be improved.
In B2B environments, and I'm just thinking of sales coaching as perhaps a particular example, it's very competitive. There are a number of people with illustrious sales careers who offer coaching in the market today. How would you go about building trust in order for them to agree to that first meeting?
I'm real good with
Mhm,
owners, generally speaking, and sales managers. But when you have that first meeting with the team, it's a little tricky because you want to
mhm,
charm them and have them see the value of what you're offering and not be rude. You're usually on a Zoom meeting with
mhm,
their entire sales team, and you don't want to seem disrespectful of the accomplishments they made so far. But I've also found if you don't, and even in an individual session, if I'm not willing to shake up the
mhm,
status quo and close them on the changes that we're going to make, how can I expect them to turn into closers? They're hiring me to turn
mhm,
their sales team into closers, right? They're right now really good salespeople, oftentimes very good presenters. And then you just leave your prospect in this state of desire. So they really want what you have, and they are just sitting ducks for someone with a lower price and oftentimes an inferior product,
mhm,
but they don't know that, or even just someone with the same product at more price that just happens to be a better closer that can establish their expertise and work with their resistance. So I'm there to basically turn them into closers. And if I can't close them on the idea of doing it, it's very hard for me to be effective. So I need to shake up their status quo, which is the hardest thing about closing people is being willing to shake up the
mhm.
status quo because it's
Yep, certainly.
confrontational.
Is there, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around this idea of being confrontational while being polite. And I guess a good way to put it is speak truth in love.
It's also what truth you
Okay.
focus on. I'm confrontational, but I've learned to not be when I walk into someone's house
Mhm,
or I walk into someone's meeting. I need to be respectful. I need to pay them a sincere compliment. I need to be aware of their successes and what they're doing right and very
mhm,
respectful of that and make that as much a part of what I'm advocating as any particular preconceived notions I might have about what will bring them success. Like they're already doing a
mhm,
lot of things that are right. And you don't want to lose that. You really have to know what those things are. And that's not something you can know
mhm,
theoretically. That requires a little bit of discovery on my part, which can be
mhm.
really delightful, can be really exciting.
So when you're talking about being willing to disrupt the status quo, obviously this is around a particular issue.
Salespeople are change agents.
Okay.
An effective closer
Mhm,
is an effective change agent, right? You would not be talking to the customer if they were
mhm.
not looking for a change. They would just be using whatever
Yeah.
they have now. So your job as a salesperson almost always is to bring change. Change requires
Mhm,
commitment. People recoil from commitment all the time. You need a lot of things to get someone to be able to commit to something. And not just like it's a good idea, right? You need them to feel the pain. You need to create
mhm,
urgency around it. You need to show the profit, money. They need to feel like they're going to feel good about it. All those things need to be present. And if you just think about commitments that you make in your own life, all
mhm.
those things are true.
Again, I would like to pick an example, and perhaps sales coaching is an example we could use. When you are speaking to perhaps a sales leader who is interested in leveling up the sales team's performance, and let's assume that they have used other services before where the end result was meh, to be fair, they're now talking to you
Right.
because they're hoping that with your sales experiences, you can actually speak into the lives of their team in order to level up. How do you speak truth and confidence into their minds and hearts?
I think a certain
Hmm.
amount of humility is really required on my end. Like I have an approach. If it works for them, great. And so far it has
Hmm.
really well, except for one situation where I didn't get a commitment going in. if I work with somebody, we need to be committed to a first phase. Like, you tell me what your goals are, I will recommend how we can accomplish that. And then we agree on a scope of
Okay.
work. And I have learned that you have to have a commitment for that initial phase, because it gets a little
Yeah.
messy at first. And I'm going to meet resistance no matter how great everything is that I'm suggesting. They're still going to resist it on some level, because it's change and it requires commitment and work on behalf of the sales team. And they have enough success to have a job. So, they're making money. And so it's not always the easiest thing to get them on board. And usually it's a mixed bag. Some people can't wait to do it. Usually the people in the middle can't wait to do it. The people on top, like, will at least take some of what you have to offer. And the people who are struggling, a lot of times they're the hardest ones, which is odd because they need it the most, right? They have nothing to lose. But that's just not how the world works for whatever reason. And so, also, I'm relatively inexpensive right now, so it's not that big a commitment on their part. But I think it's always a big commitment in terms of time and process, because the opportunity cost, no matter who you are, is still huge when you're going down a road that's different than whatever they're doing now has brought them the success that they have. And so what I'm advocating is hopefully going to bring more success, and they need to believe that in order to fully.
At the beginning of the episode, I talked about two words that I thought were quite interesting in the title of your book, one of them being trust and the other being joy. I'm curious, why pick joy as a emotive word to use in the title? And more importantly, how do you see it playing out in your sales process?
Vinay, you are never tired driving home from a sale, right? And so why are you don't have the money yet, right? In sales, there's a million things that could make it though, so you never see that money. You haven't risen to the top of the sales board, let alone bought whatever thing that you thought you could get with the money. And yet it's like a magic carpet ride. Because you've earned some. And so the question is why? And it's different for different people. For me, earning someone's trust is an incredibly powerful experience. And it fulfills something in me that I did not know was there until I learned how to do it. And so it really is a feeling. I did not take a job interview with a company working for scoundrels in order to become a trustworthy person, right? But that's how the process started, and that's what unfolded for me, because it turns out the best way to earn someone's trust is to be trustworthy. And so the joy that has come from this process is so powerful that I wanted that to be what distinguishes a closer from a salesperson, and not the ability to impose their will on customers, which is how I perceive a lot of the literature that's out there right now. And so you're talking about a part of sales closing, which many salespeople, especially beginners, but even some seasoned salespeople, find a little bit beneath them and sometimes incredibly awkward, right? But that's not my experience of it. My experience of it is a front row seat into how people make decisions, and the enhanced ability to get them something that they want, especially something that I helped make them want. That experience has been one of the most rewarding experiences in my life. And there's lots of spoils that come from it, but the biggest one is feeling good about it. And that's why the book's called The Joy
Brilliant.
of Closing.
You talked about storytelling a little bit earlier on. Given your experiences as being involved in the film industry, directing a movie, what would you say makes for effective storytelling?
Well, in the context of sales, it's taken the customer. It's why you need a pitch, because the goal is to take a customer on an emotional experience. So your sales presentation should be sensual. It should have emotional appeals. It should have highs and lows. It should have moments where they're extremely uncomfortable and where they're chomping at the bit to be a part of what you're advocating them to do. And if your presentation doesn't take them through all those emotions, if it's just a dry thing about how effective your product is, why can they just read a Wikipedia entry and then buy the cheapest thing on the internet if that's all you're doing for them?
Would you say that there needs to be an investment from not just their sales leaders, but perhaps even executive leadership, the CEOs, for example, in terms of investing or encouraging people to develop their emotional intelligence especially in sales teams?
In terms of leadership or CEOs, CEOs are natural closers. They raise money, but mostly because they have everything you need to close a customer. They know the intentions of their company. They understand the why their company exists, right? I work with a lot of companies where it's a CEO who was basically their
Mhm.
closer. They're going from 5 million in business to what they want to be like a household name, right? And so they're like, look, I got to run the company. I can't go on all the sales calls. I need to build a sales team. And maybe they have one or two people, but now they're really looking to expand, right? And the problem is they focus on hiring great presenters. And what they don't get is what they're bringing to the situation, which is
Mhm.
belief. They know the need, the big need that their company was designed to fulfill, and they know how to connect a potential customer with the need that their company was
Mhm.
created to fill. They have utter faith in their company's intentions because they are their intentions. So if that company has a sincere desire to make things good for the customer, which they usually do, that gets communicated in everything they say to the customer, right? And they know how to talk about their product. They know how to present price and close people just because they believe so hard in what they're doing. But the sales team they hire doesn't always have that. And so part of my job is connecting the CEOs, all the things
Mhm.
that they do right to their sales team and making that part of the communication to the customer and part of the pitch, really. It's amazing. If you want to fix your sales team up, the
Mhm.
instant fix is work on your company
Mhm.
story. Because that CEO knows why the company, and make it about the why, and talk about your core customer in a way that customer that you're speaking to wants to become them. So in a
Mhm.
very aspirational way, and then talk about why you work there and make it personal. This is something that B&B companies completely ignore. But if you ask the best salesperson on that sales team, or the most effective, the most successful, almost always they will be talking
Mhm.
about why they work.
With the evolution of AI and things of that nature, crafting bit of a story around your brand, etc., would it become a little bit easier in terms of being able to put your ideas across and articulate it in some shape or form?
I don't think so. I think it's so
Okay.
intuitive because it's got to be personal. It's really
Mhm.
why you work there. Look, you work for a company for a reason. You could, sure, they offered you a job and
Mhm.
it probably paid the most, but there's other reasons. There's always
Mhm.
other reasons. And why do you continue to show up every day? Are you invested in your company's success and why? There's always some personal connection. And if there isn't, maybe you're working for the wrong company. And again, listen, my coaching, my sales
Mhm.
approach is not for everybody. I'm really good at helping people sell different and better and sell on
Mhm.
value versus price. If you're just the cheapest option out there, my coaching may not be as effective as it would be for someone who's trying to sell a premium product and needs a customer to understand the value of it. That's really, or maybe just a premium
Mhm.
service with better intentions than their competition and a higher price tag. I can work with that all day long. But that doesn't mean the principles in my book wouldn't still relate to someone selling on price, because the same thing for cheaper is
Mhm.
a good pitch, because the minute you say you're cheaper, the customer is
Mhm.
going to think it's lesser. And so even then you need an effective pitch to understand that's definitely going to be part of why your company exists. We wanted to provide this premium service to as many
Mhm.
people as possible. So that's why this company was created. So you could have the same wonderful thing that bigger, more deeper
Mhm.
pocket companies have. So that's a great
Certainly.
pitch to
So if you're
companies.
very focused on the value, then would it also be fair to
Mhm.
say that finding the right types of customers also, I guess, a related issue?
Oh, that's what I was going to tell you about sales training. I've done a million kinds of trainings. Honestly, that
Mhm.
resonates so not at all with me that I can't even remember the four personalities. I know
Mhm.
there's driver and that's it. I can't even think of the rest. And I think it's because the notion that you need to pay that kind of attention to the customer is predicated on the idea of you
Mhm.
turning into something different for each kind of customer. And that's just an
Mhm.
anathema to me. I think you need to be who you are and be connected to your company and your product in the ways that you are. And that will be attractive to a lot of customers, not every customer, but there are other salespeople in your company that can appeal to
Mhm.
that customer. If you're trying to appeal to everybody, especially based on some kind of intellectual process and then a manipulation of what they know about you, there is no intimacy. So I don't think you need to figure that stuff out. I think you need to figure out what in your product, what in your company appeals to the humanity of every customer so that they have real reasons for moving forward that are real and valuable and personal to you. That's where your power is. It's not in trying to how to be everything to everybody. It's really being you in a very distilled, effective, laser focused manner that connects the person you're talking to with the value proposition of your company and your product. That's valuable to customers.
With this idea of taking a trust-based approach, would you say that there are perhaps a couple of areas that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
Is being trustworthy and not figuring out how to talk about figuring out how to there's or you have to decide, do I want to say that thing that'll make the customer like me, or do I say the thing that will make them trust me? And I love erring on the side of the thing that'll make them trust me. I would rather tell a customer something that they didn't want to hear than blow smoke up their ass and then have them come back later and oopsie daisy, oh yeah, I didn't mention this. Like that to me is hell. And also, I think here's the thing you have to know. Customers will never buy from someone that they don't trust. They will buy from someone they don't like, although most of the time, by the time they trust you, they actually like you. But I love it when a customer doesn't like me because it's something I said that someone else told them that they want to believe, but then I can show them how it's not true. That is like the instant, like the rocket ship to a step. And you tell trainings too, but I would never go into a sales meeting without something, hopefully a lot of things that I'm going to tell them that I know whoever they met with before isn't going to tell them. That's really valuable and really important. It's that they're getting the whole story. That's a really effective tool.
Okay, brilliant. And to wrap up, Bob, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Oh, I will leave that to you and your listeners, Vinay. But I'm just getting ready to launch a thing for companies that want to go from less than $10 million to more than teens of millions of dollars. And if that's you and that's your company, find me on my website and or LinkedIn, and we can talk about how that could happen for you in a really fun
And
way.
your website being?
Joyofclosing.com is my website, and I'm Bob at joyofclosing.com. Also on LinkedIn. My book's on Amazon. So Bob King, Joy of Here. I'll hold it up. This one right there with the green jet. The joy of the season was the watchword. But yeah, it's a fun book. And if you're a CEO, it's basically CEO porn, I think, so far. See, when CEOs read it, I usually get hired. So if you're a CEO,
Bob, thank you so much for doing this. Much appreciated.
what a pleasure.